how to utilize the scientific glass techniques in their art practice.
Yes, yes, thank you. Cool, so I have a bunch of samples and stuff here that I'm going to probably pass around, but if anybody wants to come get a closer look, I have, a lot of times the way I work is I do sort of practice trial runs before I start to do stuff, so I have a sample here of a bubble I was trying to get the right texture for chainmail for a piece, and so I was playing with all different tools and stuff. And then I have a bunch of stuff over here sort of in varying states of completion. Some things that during the pandemic I would start stuff and then just never come back to it. So I have a lot of stuff like that. Yeah, we can pass it around. And we'll pass around, so I have there's a bunny head, there's the start of a bunny with the body minus the ears. I've got the devil's head. Most of the stuff has been flame polished, so it's not sharp, but be careful. Some of it is still a little sharp on the bottom. And then I guess there's a couple of things that I'd like to pass around in order, if possible. So if I pass you something, do you want me to just Vanna white it? Yeah, maybe I'll have you, and maybe you can pass it to we'll start off with one, and everybody can get a look. So that's the first step. I always start out with just a blank. So we can pass, step one is for maybe 1 and 2. Yeah. People have usually seen step 1, the blank. He's got that right there. Step 2 for making a figure is that sort of peanut shape there. Whenever I'm sculpting, I always start off with really rough shapes. I sculpt very similar to the way I draw. When you're doing a sketch, you start out with sort of basic general shapes, and then you start to work in more detail. So I get that peanut shape. Thank you, Katie. I'll go in, I'll flatten the peanut shape on either side, a little bit less flat on the side that's going to become the butt later on. And I always carve in a guiding line right down the back along the spine. So we'll pass that one around. So that's step 3. And step 3 is how we get to sort of a step 4. Here, pass that around. My step 4 is when I start to work in little details. So when you take a look at this one, you'll start to notice stuff like the belly button, some rolls of fat in there, just different things. The more time I spend on it, the more details I work in. And then the very last step is when, or almost last step, is when all those details are finally in there. I go back in, I do things like, you wouldn't really think so, but the armpits are a very crucial detail. Like a figure looks super weird. When I'm working, you'll see it looks super, super weird. And then you do the armpits and you're like, that makes a lot more sense. So I'm starting off at sort of just past that step 3 phase that I passed around over there. So for this phase, I made my peanut shape. I flattened it on either side, and then the next step was to go in here and let the material drift out towards the shoulders. I wanted to pull some of the material away from the chest, and so that I'd have some stuff to work with in the shoulder. So just by heating one section of the bubble, I was really heating from here over and from here up. So just this one little quadrant, I let it get hot and naturally drip down into that area to get that shape. Sometimes I'll even give it a little hot shot flick, a little centrifugal, yeah, a little to get started. So that's where I get started here with a blank. I figure most people know, a lot of people have seen making blanks before, so figure we skip to the fun part.
But that blanks that you started with for that one is a lot bigger than what you're showing.
It's bigger than what I showed. Yeah, this set of samples I've had for a while, and the first time I made this blank, I should have made probably 2 to keep with the set going forward, but I just remake it every time. So I prepped that up before today for us. Okay, I'm going to cut this rod real quick. So when I'm making a piece for plasma, I want everything to be really, really clean. I typically clean everything off with isopropyl before I start working. And then I'm also cleaning the glass periodically as I'm working, not with more isopropyl when it's hot, because that will go, create a little firebomb. But I have this really handy tool for when I'm coming in and out of the kiln I got it from Crow Print Tools. It is just a corn husk brush, and I use this to dust the kiln dust off so I don't cook anything in there. It's a really nice tool. We're going to start from cold today, so we don't need it. Crow Print Tools. They actually, their tools are typically, they make tools for the hot shop. Interesting. They make tools for the hot shop, but that brush specifically they made for flame workers.
So you use that if you're taking a partially finished piece out of the kiln and then you're just about to rework it?
Yeah, because the more complicated a piece is, you want to go in and out of the kiln kind of quite frequently. If it gets too hot, or gets too cold rather, then you're going to get cracks in your piece and it's going to want to break on you. So I'm just going to slowly heat this up. I cut my finger as I was setting all this stuff up, so got a little funky finger action going on. Okay. So I kind of start off with a cooler heat, get this nice and sooty, and then I'll start to kind of give it a little bit more as I go. I'm just going to slowly heat it up. Normally I would bring the glass up in a kiln, especially the more complicated the piece is. I would let it soak in the kiln for longer. The bigger, thicker, and more complex the piece is, you want to let it sit for a bit. Okay, so my first step always after getting my general shape is to go back in and carve the lines along the stomach and the rolls on the sides. And then I'll go back in and I'll do the butt. So again, I'm going to start out with sort of the bigger details first and work my way towards the finer details. So I use two types of heat when I'm sculpting. I use a softer heat to kind of heat a wider area, and a sharper flame when I'm going to try to just hit one spot. So I want to move more material to do the tummy. So I'm going to kind of get a wide area, just nice and gently hot, and I'm going to let the heat sink all the way in through the layers of the glass. I've got a graphite butter knife here, and to use this tool, I just always go in, I use the flat ends, and I kind of gently touch and curve. And anytime I draw a line with a tool, that puts stress in the glass. So I go back in and I give it a little heat, and at this point I can adjust that line a little bit if I need to. I like the graphite better than the metal because you can glide across the surface of the glass without scratching it. Metal will scratch the glass, but the graphite won't. And a lot of times sculptors will say, oh, you want to do the most difficult side first, the side that you're not going to be able to see while you're working. And I always screw that up in my brain. So I've just started to learn to be a little ambidextrous. You see, I just switched hands. I'm right-handed, but I'm going to do the same move that I just did with my left hand so I can look dead on the piece as I do that. And I'm not blowing super hard, I'm just putting a little bit of pressure in there as I do that. And then I can go back in and I can give it a little more heat and I can tweak it. I always have this problem though where if I spend too much time in one area, it ends up getting cold, it starts to crack. Sometimes it's better to just keep going, especially in the beginning when I was learning this. I feel like I tell my lovely student Chris all the time, it's better to practice the steps over and over again and get a feel for it than try to make something perfect on the first go of it.
If only I would listen to you.
We'll get there. So I'm just going in now and I'm going to start to carve in the gap where the two legs will meet. So I have a nice hot heat. I'm not blowing right now, I'm carving, and then I go back in and blow. And I'm gonna kind of do just a very gentle heat over here. It started to blow out in one spot more than another, so I'm trying to build up heat where it didn't move as much, so I can get more of a gentle curve going. Now do the same thing on the opposite side. I always think there's a time in your sculpture where you're going to be like, this looks really weird and I should start over. And I feel like that sometimes you should start over. James gave me some good advice when he was my TA at Pilchuck. He said, if it would take you longer to fix it than it would to start over, you should just start over. And I hear you in my head every time I say it's time to start over. Awesome. So just kind of going in, doing those general lines right now. Now I'm going to go back up here and do the curves by the ribs. I try to move around the piece a lot to keep everything warm. Don't take up too much time, just keep going. If I was doing something more complicated, I would kiln this a lot more. We're in a demo, so it's crunch time, baby. And I didn't love that line. I think I went in a little too aggressively. So I'm just kind of softening it up. A lot of the lines that I make, I will end up softening up later just naturally as I go through the process, but that's okay. It lends itself to the sculpture, giving it more gentle curves. And when I blow into the piece, it's the lightest puff. A lot of times I think people blow too much or not quite enough. It can be hard to find that balance, especially if you're used to using a blow hose or not used to using a blow hose and you're switching up your style. The blow hose was a game changer for me, just being able to look at what you're doing as you're adding air for these sculptures really makes a big difference. And as I'm doing this, I'm really trying to, I'm really screwing with the wall weight. I'm trying not to mess with it too much because I don't want problems, but to some degree it can't be helped.
What do you mean by that when you say screwing with the wall weight?
Making it thicker in some places, thinner in other, that just the glass isn't like that, it adds stress to the glass. It's not something that, it's not, you can have differences in wall weight and anneal a piece and have it be fine. But it'll probably give you a challenge while you're working on it. For sure. For sure. Yeah. Maybe that spoke to you on a personal level.
Maybe a little.
Just a little bit. I'll try not to at you next time. Okay.
Well, that also, when I heat, and you blew, and where you meant for it to go was where it blew. And often I'm like, oh crap, why did it go there?
I like to think of the flame as like a laser beam, right? And you're painting with the laser beam. So anywhere where you want the glass to move, you've got to paint that heat into that area. And it's always good to give it a second because really thin areas want to blow out first, but thick areas will hold on to that heat and they will basically work for a little bit longer. So I always do just very, very gentle puffs. And if you start out with a move doing it gently and just light and you don't like it, you can kind of melt it back in a little bit and try again. Yeah, paint in that flame. It's all about kind of moving around and seeing where the glass is starting to accept that heat, where it's starting to glow. I know it's glowing in that area. It's going to start to puff out in that spot. All right, let's see. A little heat down here again. I'm going to go in now into the butt cheeks. This this is the part of the demonstration where we find out, you know, if you're a butt or a boob person. Everyone's got their preference.
Now, would you ordinarily go into the kiln at that point?
Maybe. I honestly, usually when I do the torso, it's more when I'm like adding attachments that I'll go back in and out of the kiln.
Okay.
When I'm doing the torso, I usually just crank out a torso all at once, working pretty quickly. I've done enough of these at this point that I don't really need to like stop and think, oh, what's my next step? What am I doing? I just keep going for it. I'm gonna kind of, before I do the butt cheeks, I'm gonna just give a little extra volume over here on the thighs. You can see I'm kind of doing, I call it the typewriter or the cartoon character eating corn, back and forth in the flame, just to heat up like a wide area. Get it nice and soft. And I try to look at it from a bunch of different angles as I'm blowing it out. Just to make sure it's not, you know, coming huge out in one direction and not moving at all in the other. And you can just see the difference, just like a little bit of heat, letting the glass drip. Instant curves, instant curves. Got to get it for the live stream. So just the difference from those two sides. Let me come back. Yes. All right, so I'll do the same thing over here. Nice, gentle flame. Cartoon character eating corn. Back and forth. Just like a nice, gentle flame in a wide area. And I'm letting the glass drip down to where I want it to go as I'm doing this. I want it to fall out to the side. That's why I'm kind of letting the glass fall towards the table where I'm heating it. I always flip back and forth between hands just to make it easier. If I were to heat like this, all that glass that I had dripping down is now dripping in towards the piece. The opposite direction of where I want it to go. Gravity is your best friend and your worst enemy. We're working on the relationship. And I always just do like light little puffs. It's hard to can't put the toothpaste back in the tube, you know? You can always puff it out a little bit more, but it gets trickier when you're trying to condense stuff. Okay. Now I have a good start here. I'm going to go right on the back side, and I'm just going to start to carve in some butt cheeks. I'm going to do a sharper flame now, because I don't want to move quite so much material. And I'm making a sweeping motion in the direction of the line that I'm going to curve. And when I touch down, I'm not only curving the knife, but I also turn the piece as I do that. Do it again.
Any recommendation for when you get it in the wrong place? Not that that would ever happen to me.
Just get it hot and try again. If I wanted to, let's say maybe I don't like the way it came out. Well, if I stay right over here and I just let the heat build right up into that line that I just made and then give it a puff, I can smooth that out.
Okay.
When I said puff, I accidentally puffed and I didn't want to do that. Always tricky doing a demo with a blow hose because you're like,
Often, yeah.
yeah. Let's get real drooly over here real quick. Alright, so one butt cheek on one side. Oh, we'll see. So just a simple line. And you start to really get those details in there. Just a quick little line. Now you've got a badonkadonk incoming. little peak shipment. Alright, so same thing, nice sweeping line. All the way across. And I try to start at that same place. And yeah, the way I did it that time, you could see as I looked dead on it, the left side, going through the left side second, because I'm right-handed, I was able to look at the other side as I did it. But I always screw that up in my brain. My lefts and my rights are like the one thing I screwed up on my driving test, though. Okay. Alright, I'm gonna do a quick little flame anneal again. I'm gonna go back in on the tummy. My favorite thing is making the belly button. The belly button and the armpits I really like. They're fun for sure. Okay. The belly button I just use with the tip of my metal knife. I'm gonna get right in there and get that area nice and hot. And then when I go in, I go from above and I roll down with my knife, just like that. I push a little harder at the tip and pull down. Just a real quick move. Huh, so you get that nice little belly button. Okay. I never do any outies, so sorry. Maybe I should. Outie visibility matters. Cool. So, I think I'm going to let those shoulders come out just a little bit more before I go back in and do the boobs. When I like to get everything in just the right position and sort of a little bit of, you know, basically the position that it's going to be before I do the boobs. Once I get those on, I'm not shifting the pieces much. You know, if I wanted to get this, you know, maybe give her a little more motion, I could get the middle section hot and kind of just like twist it a little bit. I would do all that stuff before adding the boobs, because when I add the boobs, I'm going to make them move with gravity along with the body. A lot of times when I see sculpted boobs in glass, they're like really like comically large, like huge, like anime titties. It's like not realistic at all. It looks really goofy, like way too big, and you know, a lot of the sculpture I feel like you see has just like this like crazy proportions that would never exist in real life. I don't like that. That kind of bothers me. Try to make it a little more realistic. So what I'm doing right now, we call it a puntito. It's a stolen hot shop term. In the hot shop, they use a puntito is a temporary punty just used to pull something out or manipulate it, and it's I've started using them all the time. So it's like a cold sealed punty, but it's even more delicate and less permanent than a cold seal. So it's just below a cold seal. Maybe we'll call it like a frigid seal or something. So I get it nice and hot. And puntito is such a cute name. That's just what we're going to stick with. So the glass itself is hot and ready to move, and the punty or puntito is just gently warm, and I'm just going to touch and start to pull in that direction that I want it to go in. I might puff a little bit of air, and maybe if you want one arm, you know, more reaching up, I would take it up in that direction right now. Nice, and then it just pops off super easily. If you have a lot of extra glass at the end, sometimes I pick that off, and then sometimes I think right now I'm just going to blow out into that glass so that I have a little bit more mass over here. So everything's nice and soft. I angle up, and I just super gently puff and start to force that bubble into that little thickness. Wait a sec. Cool.
How do you keep that from getting too thin below where the thick part was?
That paused before I started to blow. When you pause for a sec, the thinner glass is going to cool down faster. The thicker glass will retain heat for longer. And so you let that thin glass cool down, then you puff again and it will go right up into, it wants to move where the thickness is. And this is sort of like a weird shape, but now I'll go back in all around there. I'm almost like thickening it up again, and bringing it back a little bit, and then puff one more time. And I can already tell that's a pretty good shape for my shoulder. I've got like a little bit of weirdness down here, where I'm heating right there. Just because I think I was chatting too much. But that's actually a good starting shape for what I like to go for. And I'm not too worried about that there's like a little bit of a wiggle underneath here, but like I said, that's where the armpit's gonna go, so it's not a big deal. Do the same thing on the other side. Nice and hot all the way around. I let the thinner glass cool. Gentle puffs. Now I'm really just focusing the heat on that like little nub. Start to puff it out. Okay. Awesome. And just before I do the boobs, I'm gonna do a little pop out here where the neck will go later. If I was gonna add a head, if I was gonna add like a head and a neck, I usually make the head as one, the head and the neck as one object that gets sealed up onto the figure. There's a bunch of different ways you can do it. I just tend to find that if I were to 100% sculpt a head, the proportions are going to be a little weird. So I make almost like a blank of the head, and then I go back in and sculpt that when it's on the piece so I can get the proportions a little closer. The head can be tricky because your head's a lot bigger than you think it is. You know, we've got all this like hair on the top of our head, so sometimes I add a head on and I'm like, oh, that's too small. But it's actually not too small. When I add the hair, it's going to increase the size of the head almost by 50%. Alright. So before I go back in and do the boobs, I'm just going to make the plane on the chest on either side just a little flatter. We don't have like these big bulbous round shoulders. We kind of have a flat plane to our chest, and our shoulders come off the side of that. I always think the more you look at something, the more you notice the little details in it. So I tend, when I'm not drawing glass, I look at a lot of other people's art. I like comics, I like paintings, and I just started following this account on Instagram called Graphite Masters, which I highly recommend. So I like to look at other artists in other mediums, because you know it's just so much easier to get a certain amount of detail in something like drawing, where you know you have time to think about it. You can go back in, you can erase. Whereas with glass, it's like you're going in there, you're making it. Of course, you can garage stuff, but if you don't have your own home studio, you can't just show up at midnight and say, "Oh, I got this idea. I got to do it right now." All right. Where did I put? Perfect. So, I always like to clean, like I said before, if I was going to do a plasma piece, I would clean this off with isopropyl. But for a demo, it's all good. We're good. Definitely going to pick off the broken part. I think there's a little bit of my blood on that piece of glass too.
A little inclusion.
Yeah, just a little inclusion, a little something.
Sign the piece.
Blood, sweat, maybe you guys can get me to cry. Sorry, someone said something?
Sign the piece.
Yeah, just sign it in my blood.
Yeah.
In the blood, yeah, exactly. Every piece comes with a vial of my blood.
Oh, that's creepy.
Look up here.
Oh, hi.
It's fine.
I was like, where are you coming from?
It's so giving to give a piece of yourself like that.
What'd you say?
It's so giving to give you a piece of yourself like that.
Yeah, right?
You only make so much work a year.
I know, yeah. You start to like suffer from extreme blood loss.
Limited edition.
All right. I think I'm struggling because of my band-aids on, but it's all right. So, when I make the boobs, trying to make them match is always tricky. They're usually sisters, but not twins. That's okay.
That's normal.
That's normal, yeah.
Biologically accurate.
Exactly. Biologically accurate. That's what we're going for. So, but I always try to get a gather, and I'll try to like remember the size of my gather. Like, I would say this gather is like the size of a GMO blueberry, or or organic grape, something like that.
Totally like that.
Always food stuff helps. Cartoon characters eating corn and GMO blueberries. With the GMO blueberry, it paints an image. Everyone's had an experience with a blueberry that you're like, that's way too big. What are they feeding these things? So my little rod is just heating up so much faster. It's like I get a little splash of heat on that chest. There we go. So I'm trying to get one spot on the chest that's a little bit hotter, but then there's this gradient coming up that is a little cooler. So when I draw this material on, hopefully I haven't let it get too big now, chatting away. I'm going to start high on the chest and draw this material down. Because like I said, boobs are affected by gravity. They are, subject to the laws of physics, just like everything else. I'm going to start right here. I draw down in the direction that I want it to go in. And I'm going to hold on for a sec. And start to puff. I'm going to see where it's puffing out and where it's not. I'll go back in. Give it a little heat on top. It's kind of thick up here. All around. Because I'm still connected with this tubulation, I can pull the material around a little bit. Okay, now I'll go back in because we're not making Madonna in the 80s. Gotta smooth that out a touch. I'm going to go all the way around. I'm going to let it shrink up a little bit. I like to look down the barrel as I puff it out. And then I'll do it on the sides to widen it up a little bit. And kind of smooth out the transition between the chest and that boob. Nice and hot. Always looking down the barrel as I do it. And this is the part where I'm like, oh, this looks really weird. Give it a couple seconds, I swear. Sculpture always looks strange, and then it'll hopefully come back to being a little more normal. Right, Chris?
In theory. Always hopeful.
I'm blowing and touching in places where I don't want it to expand.
Honestly, this is the part where I start to panic.
The part where everybody wants to start to panic. I'm getting a little sweaty and taking this off.
So
On your hand. There we go.
She's done that move before.
It's worse when you got a hoodie on.
Yeah.
Okay. Like I said, I'm letting that glass drip down with gravity. It's going to kind of let it Smooth out a little bit, going across. Puffing. And then I push and puff so that it stays flat on the top of the chest. Now I'm going to start to go in here, carve up some lines for the cleavage. And then I come on in here and I'm going to connect what's going to be the armpits, but I always do that last. Not dead last, but after I get the boots on. Just like that. I don't want to flatten anything out, but the glass kind of wants to connect straight into the shoulder. So I just go right back in here. Just a little graphite to kind of make some more defining lines in there. And then again, anytime I touch it with a tool, you're going to have kill marks. So I just go back in, smooth it out a little bit.